Hi, this is Jim from TrekWorld, and today I want to give you an update as to where we are with the developments in the 3-foot model that was recovered back in October of last year. Please consider supporting this channel. The easiest way to do so is to press the join button on any video. For a mere 99 cents a month, it will get you access to private community messages, prioritized response to comment, exclusive live streams, and access to videos that have not been released yet to the public. So I'm going to refer to this basically as my June update, because I will probably be doing these once a month with information that I found out since the last time we talked. So just to bring everybody up to speed for a common starting point, in case you haven't seen the earlier videos, on October 27th of last year, two gentlemen in the Burbank area purchased the contents of a storage locker where the renter had not been paying the bills. And what they found inside was pretty interesting. They found a small wooden ship. They really didn't know much about it. It was obvious to them that it had something to do with Star Trek because it was a Star Trek ship. And on the bottom of it, there was a business card that was taped to it with the name Richard Dayton. So they went home and they did a very, very high-level Google search. But they became aware of the fact, okay, this is a model that was made for Star Trek by Richard Dayton. They knew nothing about its scarcity or how many models were made. Is it a collector's item? What is it? But they figured, hey, Star Trek, let's see what we get. So they stuck it up on eBay with an opening bid of $1,000. Within minutes, the internet began to buzz with people who have stumbled across this and determined that, hey, this might in fact be the 3-foot model that had been stolen 40-some years ago from Gene Roddenberry. So, short story, they pulled the auction later that night. We found out that after that, they went to Heritage Auctions in Los Angeles to get the item authenticated and to offer it for auction. Now, the original appraised value of the model by Heritage was $800,000. And the reason they appraised it, just in case you're wondering, is they required the two gentlemen to carry liability insurance. The item had to be insured while it was in the possession of Heritage Auctions. It's just standard procedure. So at that point, the owners think, hey, $800,000 model. And they make an arrangement with Heritage to go ahead and put it to auction in July of 2024. In the meantime, the internet pushed from one side and Heritage Auctions pushed from the other, and inevitably Heritage Auctions began talking with Roddenberry. Fast forward to April 1st, when a group of well-known individuals at the Heritage Auction office in Los Angeles, and they begin examining this wooden model, which by this point, everybody had already pretty much agreed on. This is it. This is the missing model we've been looking for 40-some years, but let's bring everybody in. We'll get all the people that are experts in this, people that were involved in the restoration of the 11-foot model at the Smithsonian, people that are involved with Paramount, people that have been involved with Heritage. Let's bring everybody in and let's take a look at this. That occurred on April 1st. The decisions were made on April 1st that it was legit. It was not going to be put up for auction, but in fact, it's going to be turned over to Roddenberry Enterprises in exchange for a finder's fee. The public knows about this on April 15th, when all the news stories hit, with pictures basically from the April 1st showing. So the press release basically recounted what I just told you, and that it was safe in the hands of Roddenberry, and that Heritage had facilitated the recovery of the model, all of which were apparently true at the time. About 2 weeks later, though, the two gentlemen that bought the model and signed it up with Heritage Auction lodged a lawsuit of fraud against Heritage Auction. There's a live stream that I did about a month ago in mid-May. That's about an hour long, but it's well worth your time. I step you through every individual event in the lawsuit. I had all the paperwork, and we just basically reviewed the entire time frame from the October 27th purchase date to the May 9th date where they filed their lawsuit saying they've never received a penny for their model. So it's been pretty much silent since then. You haven't heard a whole lot on the internet about this, but I picked up some information from various people that pointed me in very specific directions to collect some information that I need to pass on to you to bring you up to speed on things that have happened since the middle of May. First and foremost, our friends at Inglorious Treksperts, which is a podcast that is run by Mark Altman and Darren Dockerman, they met and they recorded a podcast last month and released it. And Darren Dockerman gave some very specific information that had not been made public before. Okay, Darren was one of the gentlemen that was actually part of the authentication team on April 1st. He talks in their podcast about being there and what they experienced. Okay, you know you like the video, so go ahead and do me a favor. Click that like button so that YouTube will know to show this video to more people. That's an interesting story that really has caused ripples in fandom as to what exactly are we truly seeing. Now, the podcast in question, I'll put a link in the description, about some way into it, Darren actually says, well,
April of last year, 2023, there were a couple of photos that were being passed around in back channels of prop makers and collectors and things like that of what appeared to be the miniature on its stand with the gooseneck stand, bent over, being rested on a chair. And underneath it was the sticker that said Richard Dayton, model builder, and his address at the time. These photos came out in April of last year of it in a storage space.
He describes all of this in that podcast and says that this happened in April. Okay, I'm assuming he saw the photo or he would not be saying that, okay? But he may have also received that information from a very good source. And just like I consider him a very good source, if he's saying it, I take him at face value. But that changes the complexion of the storage unit. We don't know who took the photograph and surfaced it on the internet in April. If any of you out there have that, please get me a link to it. Get me that photo, and I'll do another background investigation and tell you what I find. But the photo's out there. I can't find anybody who will admit to having it. But Darren acknowledged it in a public podcast. It was there, and it was on April 24th, and there were questions even then. Is that the real deal? Because it sure looked like it. The next thing we know about, according to the lawsuit, our friends, the two buyers, they bought that storage container on October 27th. That is a matter of public record. The date is actually included in the lawsuit against Heritage Auctions. So they claim they bought it sight unseen and that when they opened it up, they found the model. So their statement is they didn't know anything about what was actually inside the storage container, definitely didn't know about the Enterprise. And when they found the Enterprise, they weren't even 100% sure what it was, hence the need to do a quick Google search that night. However, in order for their story to be 100% true, then another person who had access to that storage container opened it, found the model, photographed the model, put it back in the storage container, and then let it sit for 6 months. So there's a huge question there. We know that it happened. We don't know who was involved in it. We don't know where the delay was. Did the people that were paying for the storage unit in April, were they the ones who defaulted in October? Kind of doubt it. I think the units have to be unpaid for much longer than just a couple of months. But then again, 6 months might be enough to put it on if they stop. But why would you do that? Why would you take the model out, photograph it, put it back in the storage container, and if you had legal right to the container, why would you then just lose that legal right and let somebody else buy it in October? So the implication to me is that something is not quite right with what we've been told so far. If that photograph turns out to be non-existent or a misremembrance by Darren's or something, then that entire whole scenario I just told you about can fall by the wayside. But as long as Darren feels that that's what he saw, then there's a very real issue here as to who actually had it. If you have any videos, photos, or documents that you would like to donate to us, please feel free to send them to Jim at trek-world.com or submit them via the web at submit.trek-world.com. A couple of weeks ago, I started to get comments that it was being discussed amongst the internet groups that they did not believe it was a coincidence that showed up after Greg Gene had passed away. I'm going to include the link in this description, and I'm going to show you a clip right now.
I'm going to say something that I want to be really clear as I say this is a theory. I have no proof of any
speculation only.
Pure speculation only. The timing of the piece being in a storage unit that went unpaid after a certain amount of time and then was sold and obviously ends up ultimately on eBay, I think surprisingly lines up in a very funny way with the death of Greg Gene. But the notion of putting it in a storage unit for safekeeping, whatever the reason, he dies, and then soon thereafter, a storage unit bill goes unpaid because none of his survivors or friends or family have any idea that he owns a storage unit or that he's renting a storage unit, and the thing pops up.
Okay, so you just heard the same thing that I did, and just a small reaction to it, and that is these two gentlemen, they're listed on their YouTube site as being former showrunners, and they're obviously well connected to the prop community. They actually have some pretty fascinating videos out on their YouTube site. I just find it unfortunate that they would give voice to that assumption, because whether they meant it or not, the ripples then went into play. I mean, that's how I found them. If somebody said, hey, go take a look at this, what they're saying about Greg. And to be clear, they're not saying it about Greg. They're laying out a scenario. But all things considered, probably should not have laid out that scenario, because it starts with a rumor. And then the next thing you know, it's everywhere. And I think that neither man believes that Greg actually had anything to do with it. The timing that they talked about is actually not as close as they thought, okay? We lost Greg in 2022. The photograph that first showed up in April of 2023 that Darren Dockerman saw, and then the auction of the storage unit on October 31st, a good year and a half after Greg's death. Now, there was not a short period of time, but more importantly, the April photo is what really, more than anything, shows that it wasn't something that Greg had in a storage container and forgot about, because somebody remembered it, photographed it, released the photo, and then put it back. Greg could not have been the one to do that. He was no longer with us. For that reason, there's been a lot of discussion on the internet about where has it been, who kept it originally, and whose property is it if it was reported by Gene Roddenberry to Paramount that it was stolen? Good questions. We don't know who took it. The implication is the Brick Price Miniatures took it because it was being used to help determine scale for the new model for Star Trek Phase 2. The only thing we know for certain is that John Pavel, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, it could be Povel, but I'm assuming it's a soft O because of the way the vowels are arranged, but John Pavel was the runner, for lack of a better word. Roddenberry gave this to Pavel. Pavel delivered it. It was never seen again. And when Roddenberry went back to Pavel and said, do you remember who borrowed it? He did not remember any of this situation. And the end result was Roddenberry goes, well, the one guy who should know about it doesn't. He has no reason not to believe him. Neither do we. So it was dropped off somewhere, probably not by itself, and it got misplaced. And a lot of stuff were dropped off at Brick Price Miniatures. By the time they were done, they claimed to have made like 1,200 props for the motion picture. One of the things we know they did was they borrowed the D7 battlecruiser from the Smithsonian and literally disassembled it into pieces, then stuck it in a box and sent it back to the Smithsonian in pieces. And they put it in pieces because they needed to do an accurate measurement for each piece as they were building the replacement battlecruiser that was going to be used in Star Trek Phase 2. And then later on, of course, in Star Trek Motion Picture. So we know that they did that with a Klingon ship. If you look at close-up pictures of the Enterprise model that it was recovered, there are like glue seams, epoxy seams, whatever, where the nacelles join the secondary hull and where the pylons support the nacelles. That indicates it had been disassembled at some point and glued back together. Why someone would disassemble it, I will leave that up to your imagination. Somebody had a need to disassemble it to possibly take measurements, like the kind that were taken with the D7. But who knows? Roddenberry did ask Robert Abel. No, they did not have it. So he had no reason to believe that they had it. So it went down as a mystery. For many, many years, nobody knew where it went until this past October. To make the assumption that somehow it ended up in Greg's hands and he kept it aside for years without telling anybody, and that it only had to be then planted afterwards, never happened in a million years. I do not know him. I've never met the man. But the people that I have met and talked to in Star Trek, behind the scenes production people, everybody has glowing things to say about Greg, astounding things to say about Greg. And so that doesn't fit. And I don't think people should be talking and making accusations they can't support, even if they're going to label it. This is just speculation. And that's the last I've heard as of right now. I wanted to bring you guys up to speed so that you would know what has transpired after I did the lawsuit review. And when we finally get Heritage's response to the lawsuit, with their side of the story, as well as the two buyers that bought the model, when are they going to get any money at all? Now, another thing that Darren mentioned that was interesting was when they went in on April 1st to do the examination of the model, he found the saucer, and it was hollow. Now, this was a surprise because everybody assumed that it was going to be solid wood, because that was the way that Dayton had described it as being, solid birch. Actually, If you look at his quotes, he didn't actually say solid birch. He said it was made of birch wood. He could not actually create the saucer, so he had another woodworker do that. It was mentioned in an earlier video that I did. We never found out who that woodworker was, but they actually made the pieces and gave it back to him, and he put the pieces together into the final 3-foot model. And as a result, all these years later, when Darren and company thunk the wooden model, they could hear the hollow echo. So that was pretty interesting. Yet one more thing that we didn't know about the model. There is so much this model still has yet to tell us. There's stickers on the model that we're not even 100% sure exactly when they were applied. Were they applied real early on and just wore off? Or were they applied after the fact? Now, as for what happens next, there is a restoration that's going to take place. What we've been hearing most of, and Darren said the same thing, was that it's probably not going to be a complete restoration to make it look like it did when it disappeared. The intent right now appears to be to conserve it, to get it back to a point where we can make sure that it's in a condition that will not deteriorate further. Straighten the nacelles, add additional support, whatever it takes, to prevent the model from breaking down anymore. Everybody would like to see it in the Smithsonian, but I don't really see the Smithsonian looking anytime soon to be able to display that model. And Darren actually even talked about that in the podcast. It's not something that would be a perfect fit for them. So maybe it could be the Pop Culture Museum up in Seattle. Some people have suggested setting it at the Ticonderoga. After all, it is also the final resting place for the Galileo shuttlecraft. So maybe that makes sense. The only difference is the value. And I think that an artifact like that, the amount of insurance that the Star Trek tour would have to carry to be able to put that on display in their public location would probably be very prohibited. Their public location is not a museum. It does not have the type of security that is necessary to secure such an object. So the verdict's still out on where it's going to end up. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for the June update. By all means, please subscribe, get notifications of when I do these updates. I will post one next month with whatever I find out in the past month. Or if we have some breaking news, I'll go ahead and join a live stream or publish a video just like this one to explain what that breaking news is and how it may impact the journey of the USS Enterprise coming home after 45 years.